Okay, it's 10 o'clock on the dot, and so we'll get started. First of all, thank you for joining the webinar. If you have problems, I guess if you have problems finding the link, you won't be on the webinar. But I've gotten a few emails this morning from folks that weren't on my distribution list, and so I sent that out today. I'll talk about that later, but if you'd like to receive updates on anything related to student data security and privacy, please email me if you are not on my list. Assessment directors are not all on my list. Some of them are, some of them are not. So reach out to me, and so you'll be a part of that distribution list and know about these webinars and updates. To introduce myself, my name is Whitney Phillips. I am the Chief Privacy Officer here at the Utah State Board of Education. I have been in this role since November 7th, so it's been a few months. And this is a new position here. The primary responsibilities of this position is to ensure student data security and privacy at the state level, and also assist LEAs and schools on meeting the requirements for federal and state law, which we will be going over. I have with me here Jared Hill. Jared, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm the Information Security Manager here for the Board of Education. I didn't come on much sooner than you did. I came on in June of this last year. It was a new position also. And in charge of the security here, but also hope to help you out there. The LEAs have resources to work with to help tighten up security and do what we can to meet the requirements that are laid out before us.
And a reason I had Jared join us today is that I am not an IT security person. My background is in research, in data management, in data sharing processes, and also with my prior position dealt with state and federal accountability. And so part of security is looking at data and training, and I know a lot about that, but Jared's strong point is with security. We have a lot of things to discuss concerning data security and privacy. This is just the beginning. We call this Webinar 1. We hope to make this a monthly webinar, and the topics will change every month. We hope to move through all of the requirements that you have to meet this heavy lift with the state statute that just came out in 2015 that is due by June 30th of this year. So with that, I'll turn time over to Jared to take you through a few slides. I'll be looking at the chat, so if you have any questions, let me know. If we need to speak a little louder or a little slower, please let me know. Jared.
All right. Guess we already covered those slides, or that slide. Mm-hmm. So I thought we'd just start out kind of giving you an overview of the landscape, the threat landscape that we all face. This is just a map from our firewall that was taken over a 30-day period of time of different attacks that are going on out there, and I don't know, it makes me feel like a little bit like a target with all these different attacks, and a lot of them are just scanning, of course, going on, looking for vulnerabilities in our networks, holes that they can take advantage of, and this is not unique. In fact, this is probably a little bit on the low side for a lot of organizations. So, so we're all kind of in the same boat here. This is another view over a 4-hour period of time that just shows you where the traffic is coming from. These are attempted connections. And they're considered events in our firewall that we need to siphon through somehow and filter out to find the ones that are really important. So again, a lot of this is probably just scanning that's going on our networks. And I realize that there are different technical levels out there, and so I'm going to try and keep this mostly kind of a high level and try to speak to everyone. Let's see, here we go. Yeah. So, what is the risk that we all face? These are just a few examples of what hackers can do, or malicious hackers, bad actors, whatever you want to call them, people that are interested in finding out about our systems and going into to do whatever they're interested in doing. They can get very creative these days. I won't spend much time on this. Let's bring it back a little bit closer to home here. I'm not trying to pick on Provo at all. That's where I'm from. This is just was an easy one to find. So this is kind of interesting. I think that phishing, social engineering, phishing is one of the major ways that we're attacked, and one of the major vulnerabilities that we have. The human link, the human person, is the weak link in the chain of security. So I think this is where training comes into play. For the most part, there's a lot of security that we can put out there, a lot of barriers that we can put out there, but they're to no avail if the individual invites the bad actor into their home, so to speak.
Will you explain what phishing is? Because
Sure.
it doesn't start with an F.
No, PHISHING. So phishing is just a way for somebody to kind of lure you in. They use that kind of as a pun there, but a bad actor, a malicious hacker, trying to get you to divulge information that will allow them to get into your network somehow.
Will they call me?
So they may call you and ask for information. They may say they may pretend to be somebody else and say, I need access to such and such system, or I need you to reset my password for me, or that sort of thing. They may call just investigating, trying to find out the layout of the organization, and then they may follow up with emails to specific people. It goes on to, there's other terms, spear phishing or whaling is when they try to get into a CEO or somebody at a higher level, superintendent's email, for example, or try to send them something specifically crafted for them that they would be more likely to fall for. And then and try to get them to either go to a site where they can receive a drive-by download of malicious software, or give up credentials that would allow them to get into systems, use their email for malicious activity, or divert their paychecks, or try to get people to wire transfer money out, and that sort of thing. Those things have been successful because these guys are really creative and they really do their homework a lot. Sometimes with social media, they find out all about you as much as they can, and then use that information against you.
Oh, interesting.
So a couple of notes here from that same article. Amelia Vance, the Director of Education, Data and Technology for the National Association of State Boards of Education, kind of points out the obvious, that parents want to know that schools have their data protected, but when you're dealing with data, there's always a level of danger. And so that's the conundrum. And then it was on the bottom piece there, it was good to see that Utah was one of the early adopters of privacy protection for students. Along with phishing, another, I guess, a big attack vector for us would be ransomware. And that's just simply the malicious actor, the hacker, trying to get you to click on a link or something like that, so that they can then encrypt your system and then ask you for money.
They hold your system hostage.
They hold it hostage, and until you pay up, and then you're taking a risk if you pay. You may or may not get the keys to unencrypt your data, but sometimes it's enough of a risk that people will take. Hospitals have been big targets, as you see. In fact, they're the ones that are usually in the headlines, so that's why I was a little bit surprised to see that education, or at least as of September of last year, they're saying that education was at 13% of being of receiving these attacks. Here's an example of a school district in South Carolina that was kind of taken hostage there. 100 servers. They were able to mitigate, I guess through backups, they were able to get several of those back online, but they did pay about $8,500 to get 25 of those systems back online to take it, and they were able to get their data back or unencrypted. So these are real threats that are out there, and I guess in looking at why schools are such a big target for these kinds of attacks, here's some bullet points that kind of give you an overview. Typically, historically, schools have been had the same network architecture across. They're tied to the same network. You've got library computers and classroom workstations all on the same network, so these can be leveraged to then it makes it easy to hop from one to the other and infect one to the other. So kind of has a domino effect there as systems are locking down. And then some basic ransomware mitigations, and also this could help out with phishing too a little bit. Start the conversation. Talk to individuals and ask where do we stand with regard to preventing these sorts of attacks, and making sure that leadership understands where the school stands, where the LEA stands, and if you don't have the resources, they need to be aware of that. Train end users, segment the network so that library stations and classroom workstations are on different network segments than the financial area, for example, or student records. Backup data, preferably off-site. And this is kind of tricky. We want to make sure that the data is not going to be infected by the ransomware as well, or the backups won't be infected also. So if the backups are infected, that does no good either. So, and that's where testing comes in to play. And then, as I mentioned earlier, managing expectations of leadership is vital. So I wanted to leave a couple resources here for you. This data privacy guidebook was produced by and I'm going to read this, Technology and Telecommunications Steering Committee of the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association of LEAs. So it's really good. It contains a range of best practices, sample vendor contracts, some checklists, it takes and gives you information about how to deal with data breaches, and it does refer to California code, so it needs to be adapted to Utah, and I'm sure that's going to be a future project of sorts. But for now, it contains some great information that we could use right away, I believe. So good stuff. And then on the right side of the slide, this is information from a consortium for school networking. They've developed this SEND packet. It stands for Smart Education Networks by Design as a guide. And it recommends a host of technical network security strategies and ideas to help keep data private. The organization's cybersecurity planning framework also aims to help districts determine whether they've prepared adequately in the areas of technological readiness and their ability to handle data breaches and whatever may come their way. So the idea here is just about being prepared. As that initial article that highlighted Pro in it emphasizes is that's what probably our number one challenge is, just being aware and then being prepared for what's to come. Should a breach occur, how do we handle that in the most efficient way, and how do we deal with the PR folks and that sort of stuff. So that's covered in these guides. And I think that brings you up to your slide. Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you have any questions.
I haven't seen any questions yet. And some of you out there, Jared and I spoke before this, and we're aware that you are not, some of you are probably the IT director, but many of you are not. Many of you are assessment director, curriculum director, and have somewhat of a role in data privacy and security. You may be the student data officer for a new role required by a state statute. You may be serving as that. So we're aware that many of you may not be as IT savvy, and I don't want you to worry. The idea of all of these laws coming up is so that you work together with IT staff to develop that, and that's what we're doing here at the state, hopefully being an example to what you should be doing with your LEAs, where security and privacy is really, it takes a few people involved for that to go forward, just as Jared suggested.
By the way, we're going to send these out to you, so you can click on these images and get this information.
Yes, we will. We'll post this to the website. That was one of the questions we have. As Jared mentioned, yes, there are a lot of concerns with data security. Here are some of the headlines that we have. And the public reach out to legislators and enact these laws to help us secure data. I want to talk about the Student Data Protection Act. This is the state statute that got passed in 2015, and it is a very heavy lift. The Senator Andrade was the main sponsor to the bill, and is very passionate in what it has, what it outlines. The bill is much like an elephant, and many things need to be done. And so we'll be going through this systematically throughout these webinars, taking just one bite at a time. I like this cartoon. I actually don't eat meat, but I thought it was kind of funny, so I couldn't think of any better metaphor, though. So there you go. The Student Data Protection Act, this is your short list, your short to-do list. This is taken directly from the statute. That the LEA needs to adopt policies to protect student data. An LEA needs to designate a student data manager. That is probably you if you're listening in. An LEA needs to create a data governance plan and have a metadata dictionary. And then the LEA needs to establish an external review process. In addition to these requirements, the policy, the data governance plan, the metadata dictionary, along with the data sharing process needs to be publicly posted on your website. And what is in red is what we will be going over today, or at least in part. And we are going to go over all of these pieces over the next few months. So if you are the student data manager for your LEA, you should be on my distribution list. If you're not, there is my email. Email me and you will be put on the list. I would also review the requirements of the Student Data Protection Act. You can find it there. Also visit our website with lots of resources there to help you. And I would begin to start having discussions with your LEA and school administrators, IT directors, and the local board members to discuss this, because I'm sure that many of your policies that you have, maybe some policies in place. I know Washington School District just passed, I think in December, their security policy. And so many of you have already working on this. All of these things are due by June 30th of 2017, and we're here to help. So please reach out to us if you have no policy in place, or if you need help revising that policy. The policy here is that we can call it the data governance plan. I call it a policy. It's kind of interchangeable here. And it includes these sections. Today we'll be going over section A and B. Let's see. Yeah, we had a question from Tim asking about sample data governance plan and metadata dictionaries. Yes, we will provide you with sample data governance plans. We will have that, I hope to have that by the end of February. And instead of 80 different plans, it'd be more than 80, I think, but we value local control, and local control says that you need to develop your own policies, but of course we're going to develop a few sample policies that you can pick and choose from. My hesitancy that I've mentioned before is I've seen sample policies before in a different state, because Utah would never do this here. But in a different state where they didn't bother to insert your school name here, and the policy was printed, maybe at least saved, but not actually utilized or implemented, and therefore carried no weight. We're looking for policies you're actually going to use. And so we're going to have sample policies out there for you, but please make sure that they actually fit your needs. And so I'll keep this slide. We'll be sending these out, but these are your responsibilities to include in the data governance plan. What's not listed here is the data sharing process, which was kept separate from the data governance plan. My suggestion is to just add in that data sharing process into the data governance plan, because I think it's a natural part. So today we'll be talking about, I'm supposed to talk slow. Today we're going to be talking about what are the best practices for maintaining and protecting student data, and B, we'll be talking about technical assistance, training, support, and auditing. And in the next webinar, we'll be talking about C and D and E as well. As far as the question about the metadata dictionary, that is not mentioned in this webinar today. That is, we decided that we at the state level would develop the tool for the metadata dictionary, not just for USBE here, but also for LEAs. You will be receiving a spreadsheet to prepare yourselves to upload your data into the metadata dictionary. This will be a very time-intensive task for the LEAs, but believe me, it will not be as time-intensive or as expensive if you purchased and developed your own metadata dictionaries. So I think that the process will be just as valuable as the product. It's kind of a self-auditing of all of the data your LEA collects. We will be outlining all of the data that the state collects, and we'll help you through that process, but it's not time to talk about that, but at least you can know that we are going to develop the mechanism in which you can upload and use our system through the data gateway for the metadata dictionary. So moving on here, we're going to, I'm going to talk to you about a few items that would satisfy in your data governance plan the portion of securing and protecting data. And one of the things I wanted to do for you all is to provide you with resources so that you can make the best decision for your LEA. But the data security checklist here outlines a number, I think I have 13 items that should be reviewed or included. And I've asked Jared to talk about a few of these. But the first of which is actually have a policy in place. When there are concerns about data privacy, and the compliance office for the feds for FERPA are called, when they reach back to the alleged breaker of FERPA, they ask for three things. They ask for a policy, they ask for their training schedule, and then they look at their IT systems. And so those are the three things that we're very focused on in making sure that we can protect data as best we can. So the first thing is to actually have a policy in place, and the plan should, clearly outline the responsibilities within your LEA. LEAs are all organized differently. We have charter schools that are organized differently. You need to keep that in mind. Who will make decisions about the data that is collected, how the data are stored, who receives access to the data. And then we have personnel security, creating an acceptable use policy that outlines appropriate uses of the internet, the extranet, the email that you provide for your employees, and making sure that your employees understand what these uses are. I know when we log into our computer, we have every once in a while there's a big paragraph explaining the acceptable use policy of the state board here, and we click on that, saying again and again that we understand the policies of us being able to have technology, that it is owned by the state and monitored by the state. So there's personnel security, and then there's physical security. Physical security is making sure that rooms are locked, things are kept into storage with a key that are personally identifiable, that there are policies, that things aren't just laying around. I know we're working on that at the state level as well, making sure that your monitor is locked when you leave your desk for any amount of time. Then we have network mapping and an inventory of the assets. Jared?
Yeah, so network mapping is really just kind of understanding the lay of the land of your network, and to be able to see how your data may traverse through the network, and what the outside world, if somebody were to breach your defenses, what they would be able to do, where they would be able to go through your network. And so that's what network mapping allows you to do. There's a variety of tools available that allow you to see, to map your network, and some of the better ones will associate applications. They'll capture application and associated data, and help you see how that information, how those applications are communicating across your network.
What position at the LEA level would they speak to? Who would be that person to talk to, whether their networks were being mapped properly?
So it would be somebody in the network administrator or IT engineer. I'm not sure what the title would be, but those folks would be the ones who would actually do that, and they should be able to explain to anyone, any of the leadership there, how the data traverses through the network, because that's kind of important. And we mentioned network segmenting earlier, and that comes into play. If I get into this certain segment, am I able to go and pivot into other segments of the network that are more critical or not? And some of that comes into play with some of the other technologies we'll talk about here as well.
An inventory of assets.
So yeah, this is kind of one that's sometimes it's a kind of a pain to keep track of everything you have, all the systems, all the endpoint devices, all the network infrastructure. But it is important to know what you have, so that you can it helps you, first of all, be able to ascertain what vulnerabilities may be on those devices, and it's the first step in keeping track of what we call change control, change management, patch management, to make sure that all the devices have the all the devices on the network have the appropriate updates that are done, and that vulnerabilities are closed off, mitigated as quickly as possible. Just as kind of a regular routine business, that should just be a part of, should be a cycle, patch management cycle, and vulnerability assessment cycle. And knowing what you have is kind of the first step of all of that.
And I suspect that many LEAs do have some processes in place, but maybe aren't as well documented as they need to be. Or maybe they are documented well. So I would reach out to your IT director, network administrator, and ask them for their policy, because this needs to be a part of the more comprehensive data governance policy. Would you guess that? Yes,
especially documentation is important for several reasons. If somebody were to leave and somebody else comes in to fill the position, they can know what's going on. But also from an auditing perspective, I think it was you sent me the article from Oregon State Board of Education that they may have had controls in place, but they didn't have them documented, and so they kind of got a slap on the hand for that. And it's just it helps leadership also know what you have in place and what's going on. So,
thanks. The other, let's see, moving down the checklist here, we have authentication. That's how they would access what user access they have. Is that right? What roles that they have? Will you talk to them about that?
Sure. So that authentication technologies essentially provide assurance that the person who's trying to get into the network has permission and authorization to do that. I guess the primary technology I would speak to here is multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, a way to, once you type in your username and password, then also get a code on your phone or a token or something like that you can plug in. And that's probably where you can get the best bang for your buck as far as authentication and the access control goes, because it just puts that extra layer and makes it that much more difficult for the attacker to be able to compromise your account, because they would have to have not only your username and password, but also that code that you receive.
Sure.
So, and that kind of leads into access control, which authentication is a form of access control. There's other access controls like session timeouts, or if you're not able to, if you type your password 5 times and you're locked out after that, or there's role-based access controls. So I can't, if I jump into a different position here, then I should lose privileges automatically by leaving the position that I'm in. And we call that least privilege. So folks shouldn't have more privileges than they need. It's easy, it's kind of a convenience to give everybody admin rights to their system so that they don't have to call you for everything. But then that also gives an attacker a way to elevate privileges once he gets into an account and then pivot into other systems. So least privileges kind of is an important aspect of access control, not giving people more than what they actually need to do their job.
And I think it also gives this resource I provides some best practices on selecting passwords that are harder to steal or to crack, that all employees should be aware of.
And that's another best practice, is having strong, unique passwords for every place you go on the internet. And especially for work, you wouldn't want the same password as the Adobe breach unveiled a lot of people who had the same password. That was a couple years ago, and that attackers were able to use their Adobe passwords to get into Google accounts or bank accounts or other accounts. So having strong, unique passwords, and that's the challenge in this day and age. So I think password managers really have a role to play here, like KeyPass or LastPass or something like that can create these strong, unique passwords for every account and keep track of it for you and allow you to change it very easily and manage those things.
Yeah, so. I heard those are helpful. We have, moving on, firewall and intrusion detection prevention systems. I'll have you read up on that. You'll have to, it's a little more technical. Also, 9 here is shut down unnecessary services. The idea is that each portal, each port, each service is a potential for someone breaching your security. And so if you're not using a service or portal to shut it down, and so that it wouldn't be open to any kind of attackers.
It's kind of the equivalent of a door or window in your house. They'll come by and check to see first if you have them, and then if they're locked or unlocked, and then if you don't need that window, it's better to to board it up or whatever. Sure. And that's kind of what you're speaking to.
And then we have mobile devices. A lot of us use our mobile devices in our positions, making sure that there is no sensitive data stored on the device, that all data that contains person identifiable data or information is sent through a secure email site, such as a service such as MoveIt, as what we use here, that there is a lock on your mobile phones, and these are if you use them for work, but it's probably best practices even if it's just for your personal use. Emailing confidential information and data. This is a problem that we have, is that information is emailed just using regular Outlook email to us. LEAs, districts, teachers, schools should not be emailing us student names even. Use the SSIDs. Don't include personal information about students even at the state level because it's not through a secure service such as MoveIt. And then we have incident handling. This is for data breaches. What are you going to do in a data breach? If you have a data breach, do you call the police? What are they going to do? What are police going to do if you might want to, especially if there's been a break-in, but let's just say data that shouldn't have been publicly posted is publicly posted. You might want to know your plan. What are you going to say from a PR standpoint? What are you going to, what kind of decisions are you going to be made? And these are very complicated, and so we provide at least a checklist for the data breach to go through that with your LEA. And then audit and compliance monitoring. Certainly, once you write this policy, it will need to be revised. And we hope that this policy, like many others, is a living, breathing document. We don't want to be too prescriptive where certain elements are no longer valuable. We want this to be updated regularly. This document that I've listed here has a data governance structure here at the state. It was mandated by state law, but it's also a good idea. We have 3 groups. We have an advisory group that works on legislative changes, any kind of legislation that comes out. They're the advisory group. Then we have a governance group, and that includes experts in IT, experts on data privacy, on FERPA. We have attorneys in that group, and many of you listening are probably in that group, and thank you so much for your service. And then we have a users group that we want to bring in as to help us make sure that any decisions that we make aren't going to have consequences that we haven't thought through for LEAs. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the service that you would like us to.
I have a comment,
Sure.
if I may, regarding the Item 12, their incident handling.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to have something in place, guidelines to know or procedures that step you through what you're going to do at the time, because sometimes it's easy to take a knee-jerk reaction and go, oh, this system's under attack, let's turn it off. Well, you may have just lost evidence, and that was held in memory. That could help you figure out exactly what happened and who did what and everything. So these things are pretty important to have in place before that happens, so that you have the tools that you need to investigate.
I agree. The next section, we have about 20 more minutes here. The next section we're talking about is still in line with the Part A of the Data Governance Plan and how we can protect student data. I believe that many of us are stewards of student data, and whoever we give access to for our data, whether it be the state or whether it be a third-party vendor, that we need to have assurances put into place that that data will be protected. Just recently, on January 13th, the state board here approved what we call Attachment C. These are standard terms and conditions whenever there is data sharing with a third-party vendor. It refers to an Attachment D. Attachment D is a list of all of the data elements that will be shared. And these standard terms and conditions are posted on our website, the Student Data Security and Privacy website at USBE. It's in the chat link there, and also on this PowerPoint. And so feel free to use that as a guide. But I wanted to go over briefly some of the requirements for these third-party vendor sharing, and then I'll be talking about training as well. I'll be going over this pretty quickly. The slides that I will share with you will include my notes on the slides, and so you'll have a lot more granular level of detail when you're reviewing these with folks that may want to be in the know. First of all, the contract scope, all elements that will be agreement. Why do we have a contract? We also have the purpose of the contract. Under FERPA, there are a few exceptions to share student-level data without consent. One of them being that the third-party vendor or third-party is serving as a school official. This means that this is work that the LEA would do, but the vendor is doing on their behalf. So that is one exception. The other one is for auditing purposes. If the federal or state government is asking for an audit of a particular program, they can get access to personally identifiable information without consent. And also the third being for program evaluation purposes. These are programs that are funded through taxpayer monies through the federal government or the state. That information would be used for evaluation purposes. And so we need to explain in our contracts which exception this falls under. If this does not fall under one of these, then you really need to ask yourselves why you are sharing the data if it doesn't fit under one of these exceptions. Also, the legitimate interests for the educational interests, the nature of the data collection, and again, anything to do with FERPA. And if you need any more information on FERPA, I suggest going to the PTAC website. It's listed at the very last slide. This is the technical assistance arm of FERPA. Therefore, all the information on PTAC is considered guidance, and not just suggestions, but actual guidance on how to read into FERPA and how to follow its guidelines. Next is the data collection and use and transmission. This essentially means that we want to make sure that the data that we give to any vendors are used for the purposes in which we have outlined and not for any other purposes. Also, to require that there There must be a lot of security provisions in place with the vendor. The vendor will have to prove that by describing its security policy, also its policy on data retention and disposal after the contract has expired. What happens to the data? Do they throw it in a trash can? That's not best practices here. And and if you need documents on how to get properly dispose and destroy data, we have that on our website as well. And yes, I will give you a copy of these slides. It's kind of a large file. I could probably make them into PDFs, and I'll email them out right after this webinar. I'll email them to everyone on my distribution list. So if you're not on my distribution list, you won't get them until they're posted to the website. That might take about a day. Other things, what happens if the third-party vendor goes bankrupt or it is acquired? This is often within, vendors usually know that this is something that they have to speak to. Also, the levels of support that the vendor will give. We need to make sure that anyone that we share our data with, that we are able to audit their processes, their procedures. We are able to see their logs of employee training on data security. So it doesn't mean we'll necessarily use it, but we need to have that available, that the LEA or the state, if you would like to put that in, can go in and audit the processes of these vendors to ensure that the data is secure. Also, this is something your attorneys will need to answer, is the governing law or jurisdiction. We have a number of vendors that are out of state. Many of them are in state, but some of them are not. We want to know what the governing law is. It should be Utah, and it should be Utah's law, seeing as we're using Utah's money. But talk to your attorneys about that. Also, what happens if we want to modify the contract? How long is the contract? Things that you should address, and many of these are addressed in the standard terms and conditions document that the state board approved just a few weeks ago. I'm not going to read through this, but liability, the new state law, the Student Data Protection Act, has that there is money for damages that third-party vendors will be required to pay if there is any data breach. I'll have to look into that to tell you exactly what that is, but this is a little different. What are the consequences when you break a FERPA law? Does anyone know out there? What happens if an organization, an LEA, does not comply with FERPA? What are the consequences? Yes, you can have a finding. Thank you, Sarah. What does a finding mean? There you are, Ralph Squire. You are the winner today. There is the threat of losing federal funding. Absolutely. It's part B of the pop quiz. Can you tell me how many times federal funding was withheld because of non-compliance with FERPA? It's a round number. Okay, Sarah, you are absolutely correct. We have a winner. Yes, 0 times have the federal government. What they do, though, is they really do offer services in how to become compliant with those 3 sections that I spoke about. Do you have a policy? Do you have training? And how are your systems? And they'll come out and start with those basics. So we want to be prepared before this happens. Unfortunately, some of the very good work IT does and other staff do in LEAs means that it means that nothing happens, right? That everything's going well, and so it's harder to see something going well, right? Until something doesn't go well.
Right, and so you tend to forget about those guys until something happens.
That's right. So, and so having the policy will be your proof and evidence that you have done your due diligence in ensuring data are protected. The last part of this presentation is just, remember, we're just taking one bite at a time, is that this second part of providing technical assistance and support and training. And this is pretty timely. There is a Senate Bill 102 that is being heard, that just passed through committee, and it actually provides stronger language on top of the Student Data Protection Act. Student Data Protection Act asks us to provide, here is the quote right here, provide for necessary technical assistance, training, support, and auditing. And there's no, it doesn't tell us exactly how. This new Senate Bill 102 outlines that LEAs are required to keep track of that training, who attended. It must be annual. So it's a little more documented, but these are things we should be doing anyway. And so I have here a site on best practices for training, but one thing that I read in this document is that first you need to establish some type of awareness of the concern, because day-to-day employees don't recognize that this is a problem. They may say something on the news, but they don't think it's part of them. And from what I understand, 95% of data breaches are because of personnel. 95%. This means that we have some control. We have control over our network systems, but we definitely need to help our employees and staff, teachers, administrators know some of these phishing emails they may get. There was one sent out with permission at USBE to check to see what the response would be, and we'll share that in a documentary that we have coming out this spring. So it's a very short documentary. As far as training goes, right now we have in the works to develop some training materials for you. First training material is for data security, not so much privacy quite yet. Privacy is kind of a little bit different. What information can you share? But security would be more of what we've been discussing today: the phishing, the sending information through email, the physical security. So we're putting together a video. We went through the curriculum of that yesterday with members of the data governance group. So first of all, we need to establish awareness in the group of why this is a problem and that it is very serious. We need to help each person understand why security is important, because everything's important, right? I mean, there's teachers are particularly inundated with trainings that are essential, and so we want to make these videos and trainings as user-friendly and fun as possible. We'll do our best. Who needs to be trained? Well, we suggest that all employees must be trained. All employees, regardless of the role, if they have any kind of interaction with personally identifiable information. Who is that? That is certainly a receptionist at a school. She receives the names of students, right? We have teachers. Do we have volunteers? How about substitute teachers? I would say all of those need to be trained. And there are training materials for volunteers, and we're developing training materials for staff. And also we're developing one for teachers in particular. So I would say new employees, current contract workers, temporary employees, and even volunteers need to be trained. Is this going to be a 5-day training? Probably not. But certainly they need to have some awareness of training. And there are training materials on PTAC's website, on other websites as well, but we want to develop our own because we think we can do a better job and make it more Utah specific.
I think the key to this training is making it relevant, and so that will probably change over the years as different threats or opportunities make themselves available or show up. Then the training needs to reflect what's most important.
I agree, and I would say with the cloud now being pretty new, that our training will include that. But had we done this a few years ago, it would not. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Keeping up to date on training and the threats that can come in. Just a plug for the cloud. Do not. The rule of thumb is if you cannot control the system in which you have personally identifiable information, you do not put it there. Unless you, for some reason out there, are controlling the cloud, and I'm not aware of it, not you.
Yeah,
don't put personally identifiable information on the cloud. It's a very useful tool for collaboration, but we have an article on our website from 2014 about that if you want a light reading for 15 pages of why you should not do that.
There's ways to audit that to see if people are doing that on the cloud, and
are there?
So there's technologies for that. Of course, budget comes into play a little bit, but there's ways to do that.
So here are some kind of training systems that we can use, or some mechanisms we can use. I like using existing systems. The cloud. Some questions about the cloud. How is the cloud avoidable? The cloud is anytime we're storing on someone else's server, correct? The data that you have should be stored on your own servers.
So I don't think we're saying avoid the cloud. I think we're saying avoid putting personally identifiable information on the cloud. Storing databases of information in places that you can't control or manage.
What about Amplify and Canvas?
So I'm not familiar with Amplify, but those are good questions, and I think it comes down to she mentioned the types of contracts you have with vendors. You may want to know where is Canvas housing your data. Is it at their facility, or is it somewhere out in the cloud? And so contracts come into play, and they're very important to understand.
I think because a lot of folks out there use Amplify and Canvas, let me address that in the next webinar, if not sooner, and answer that question specifically. And if you have specific questions, please do ask them. And more than likely, I'll need to get back to you on specific questions, but feel free to ask or email them to me. So I suggest with this training using an existing mechanism. That's a good question, Ashley. Okay, I'll get back to you. Maybe there's an onboarding process with new employees, or you do it once a year with a larger training. So kind of embed it within existing trainings. Developing just kind of a culture of security in the organization, not cutting corners and just sending information through email, but making things, understanding that, these spreadsheets are not just numbers and alphabet. It's they're students, and we should protect their information, and also the information of teachers and all the other information you have. We should protect it as much as we can, and having that being a priority is a culture shift. So what should we be training on? here are some ideas of what you can train on. We will be going over, this is just for security in particular, not privacy. We will be including all of these topics in the video that we are developing. I'm meeting with the videographer on Tuesday to get things started. If out there in the field, if you come across a video that you think is superior to other ones that you've seen, please send them on to me. I've seen a few. There's a lot of dry privacy videos out there, and I'm not saying ours won't be, but and so there's different delivery mechanisms. I have notes on these that will go over those in detail, but we're about out of time. Here's a review of resources. We're going to have our second webinar to take our next bite out of the elephant.
Never eat the elephant.
No, poor elephants. Next, March 1st on Wednesday at the same time. I think we may make this a regular date of the first Wednesday of the month from 10 to 11 to have these webinars. And another thing I wanted to plug was the USET conference. That's Utah Coalition for Educational Technology. I know that they focus more on instructional technology pieces, not as much with data security and privacy, but I wanted to let you know that this might be a good conference to attend. And here's their little flyer. And the last thing is that we will, I'm in the works of creating kind of a half-day mini conference attached to the data conference, which is scheduled for April 26th. I'm not sure if it'll be the day before or the day after, or if we'll add on some time to that existing conference. And what we have planned are about 4 hours of data security and privacy training. We're going to bring in some experts from around the state, and actually a few people from out of the state as well, to give us best practices. And as soon as I know when that's going to happen, I will let you all know. But we are out of time. We like to start on time and end on time, so I want to thank you for your time. Thanks, Jared. You'll be seeing him quite a bit. And, you know, I'm an army of just one here at the state, but reaching out to IT and other folks, getting a lot more support on that. But if you have any questions, additional questions, email me and get on the distribution list. And thank you for all you do, and have a lovely day.
Bye.